So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Productivity and Robert Half Collaboration Forum. My name is Paul Middleton, and I'm joined here today by my colleagues from Productivity and our sister company, Robert Half. This is our weekly collaboration forum, and this is our fifth and final series that will take us to the end of English lockdown on June the 21st, hopefully. It's great to see some familiar faces and some new faces alike. Since March of last year, our weekly forum has been aiming to invigorate, challenge and inspire us all to be bold, to look beyond our computer screens, to stand up and think differently, as well as to bring optimism in what has been for so many a time of disruption, uncertainty and often change. Over the months, our forum has become a place for today's business leaders and our leaders of tomorrow to talk to each other, learn from each other, challenge each other, and gain confidence from each other's perspectives and experiences. And that aim is the same as today as it's always been. This is your forum. It's not a closed forum. You're not muted. It's pretty informal. And I urge you all to get involved and make your voice heard. So a thread that has run through all of our forums is that now is a time to think differently and to be actioning both the big and the small ideas. Put differently, we believe at Productivity and Robert Half that if we don't proactively drive change during this continued period of disruption, we run the risk of rapidly becoming irrelevant and falling behind the pack. But there's another danger now. We've talked about it in other weeks, and it's a danger lurking for us all, a tipping point, if you like, that we are rapidly approaching as we begin to unlock and spend more time face to face with our colleagues and move out of our home offices and into our offices themselves. And that danger is that we sleepwalk back into our old working habits and that we leave behind our COVID mindset, a mindset that's given us a newfound ability to drive change at a rate we previously thought impossible, to achieve things we were told could not be done, and to suddenly be able to overcome barriers that previously seemed unscalable. In other words, over the last 14 months, we've successfully broken an office-based 9-to-5 working pattern that's been with us for centuries. Our challenge to all of you in this forum is to not march backwards and fall into those old habits and lose everything we've achieved so far. Because if we do, you can be sure that others won't and will simply fall behind. Instead, let's be bold and imagine what the future can be and how we can grasp it. And that's exactly what we've been doing here and we'll keep doing on this forum. We've already looked at the future of culture, the future of healthcare, the future of social justice and inclusion, the future of ESG and the future of success. And in the coming weeks, we'll be looking at the future of work, the future of retail, entertainment, the office, and many more topics, and digging into how you can shape that future and build on what you've already achieved and not sleepwalk back into the past. And today we're looking at the future of technology. Every day we are tempted by the emergence of new technologies to solve our business and personal challenges. The pace of technology innovation and creativity has never been so high, offering solutions to challenges that are central to our business lives and also sometimes to problems we don't even know that we have. How should we choose and embrace the right technology? How can technology shape our future success? What is the impact of choosing the wrong technology? Should we now have a greater expectation of the pace and disruption of technology innovation and the impact it will have on our lives, given everything we've achieved during the pandemic? Or on the other hand, do you feel that we risk dehumanizing our interaction with each other and our clients through increasing use of technology in our businesses? Like most weeks, we've tried to take on the big topics and the big topics that are important to you. And it goes without saying, we are not going to be able to cover every aspect of technology in 1 hour. It's a huge topic and we're going to take some bite-sized chunks. But most importantly, go in the direction that you, our attendees, take us. So the more you get involved, the more relevant it will be for you. To facilitate our discussion today, I'm delighted to introduce our panelist and inspirator, Nicklas Bergman. Nicklas is an entrepreneur, technology investor and futurist who focuses on investments and business development in instrumentation, nanotechnology, computing, new materials and new media art. Nicklas aims to understand where technology is taking us and if we're ready for the upcoming tech storm, with particular interests across innovation, AI, predictive analytics and quantum computing. He's a strategic advisor to European commissioners, and the European Innovation Council, working on a new innovation strategy for Europe. He's also Scandinavian representative of the TechCast technology think tank in Washington, DC. As a writer, he set out his thoughts on the merger of technology, society, and business, which I'm sure we'll be talking more about shortly. And in 2016, he published a book on how to deal with the new technologies from a business perspective called Surviving the Tech Storm. I'm also pleased to welcome one of my colleagues from Protiviti, Roland Carandang, who is Managing Director in our London office and a leader in our technology consulting business. Roland has led the charge in driving the innovation agenda, not just within Protiviti, but across many of our clients. Roland's a specialist in cybersecurity and leads a custom software team who focuses on exploiting emerging but accessible technologies like Microsoft Power Platforms and artificial intelligence. And I'm pleased to say he'll be sharing his perspectives during today's session as well. So, Nicklas, we're delighted you're able to join us today. And I'd like to pick up on that last point I made about your book, Navigating the Tech Storm. As in it, you describe how you see technology as the strongest driver of change and how it's critical for business leaders to be able to navigate the impact of technology on their business and society. But when we have seen so much change and disruption over the last 14 months, in what way do you think technology is going to be at the heart of our future business success?
I mean, good morning, by the way.
Good morning.
Great to be here. I mean, what I find interesting is that, I mean, to be honest and a bit frank, what we've seen in the past 14 months is that not necessarily new innovation, but the deployment of technology that's been around for quite some time. I mean, teleconferencing and video calls, that is nothing new with that. And many of the platforms where we collaborate on right now are not new in essence. I mean, I remember the first time I tried to do video conferencing. I mean, that's 20 years ago. It didn't really work. But I mean, some of these systems have been around for quite some time. And now, I mean, because of the pandemic, the speed of implementation on a more personal level, the speed of how we change our behavior has, of course, increased a lot. So, I mean, that's one side of it. And the other part of this is that we actually see more on a scientific innovation level, a lot of things happening in biotechnology, of course, over the past 14 months. I mean, no one in these industries thought that we would be able to get the vaccines ready so quick, for example. We also see that in computation, in many different areas, there's been an increasing activity of trying to solve many of the issues that we are actually facing now. So yes, on the one hand, it's more of an implementation of digital technologies that's been around. On the other hand, there's a great influx of money, capacity, and intelligence into areas in, for example, biotechnology. So, yeah.
No, thanks, Nick. So given the pace of change we've seen over the last 14 months, should we now be expecting a bigger tech storm coming around the corner than we've ever seen before, and also maybe demanding that we see that as well?
I mean, there are thinkers that are arguing that the rate of innovation is, we have a declining innovation spectrum, that we are, I mean, we've heard that one before, that everything that can be invented has been invented, and then we heard that 100 years ago, we heard that 50 years ago, and we're hearing it now. For me, working right in the middle of, in between science, innovation, and business, I can't see that. Yes, it's a fact that IT is a mature technology. I mean, the most obvious example of that is that we've actually been able to continue working relatively much as normal, even though we've been right in the middle of a pandemic for the past year or so, meaning that these technologies are around and they're easily deployed, relatively easily deployed. Not always that we appreciate what's happening, or we appreciate to be in lockdown or not meeting our colleagues or friends, but I mean, it's actually been I mean, I think it's been working quite well, actually. So I mean, that's the example of how existing technologies are maturing, meaning that they are relatively accessible to each and every one of us.
Yeah.
So I mean, we've seen that in history. We've seen that when technologies are maturing and gaining traction and becoming mainstream. We saw that with electricity about 100 years ago, a bit more. We've seen that with the car in the, let's say, 1950s, when that started to be commonly used, at least in the Western world. And we're seeing that with IT now. It's everywhere. We definitely used to have our IT tools, our smartphones with us all the time. The last thing we do before we fall asleep, the first thing we do when we wake up, etc.
Yeah.
So what's fascinating there is, in any time of great transformation, when you see one technology maturing and new technologies taking off, it can be when we went from steam engine to electricity, or from IT to something else. We see the same things happening. We see that we change the perspectives of time. I mean, today it's even more just in time as it's been ever before. We see that our impression of time, our impression of time, in the sense that we feel that it's speeding up, things are going faster. We see that we are very curious. We need to learn more. We need to cross-pollinate between sectors and technologies. People that have the ability to take in from many different sectors. Multidisciplinarity, for example, is the norm. The Renaissance man, the Renaissance person, that is something where we see in these times of change. We see it now, and we saw it, as I said, in these earlier technological shifts. And for me, that's interesting, because there's so many things out there. Investing in IT in the past decade has been kind of a low-hanging fruit as an investor. There's been all these interesting things happening. Sorry, great returns. It's been quite easy.
Yeah.
Everything, again, relatively speaking, has been easy and quite cheap to start a company. But we are definitely seeing a change in my world, where we go more and more into science and technology investments, in biotechnology, in genetics, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, the energy sector, for example, areas where we're going back to the basics. We need to design and build and promote the systems and not the end user applications again.
Yeah.
Meaning that it's a sort of different way of approaching innovation right now.
So you've mentioned a lot of things there. You know, you said technology is everywhere. What typical mistakes do you see businesses making in terms of how they navigate the choice, implementation, and use of their technology?
I mean, when I meet with business leaders and also talk to innovators and see what is going wrong when companies miss the train, or when they don't really understand what's happening around them, especially with established companies trying to understand and approach a new technology. We can say that there's actually four key areas that creates challenges. And the first one is what you can call delayed participation. If companies are not on board, quite often you start with a small project, you don't really get it, you put it to the side and you wait and see. And that is a challenge. There's no way you can wait and see right now. You don't need to be the first one jumping on every new innovation, but you need to understand. So you need to be in the system. You need to understand what's happening around you. I mean, those first projects are usually quite crude, simple, not very good, not filling all the expectations that customers or users have. So it's a challenge to continue working with this. But you really must be on top of it and at least be part of the ecosystem, not necessarily in the forefront, but you need to be part of the ecosystem and not wait and see. So that's number one. Number two is that it's really, really easy to stick with the familiar. I mean, it's a psychological fact that we are very risk averse, and we are change averse as humans. And that creates a challenge when you're trying to find new ways of doing things. You need to venture into the unknown, and that is scary for all of us. The third thing here is that you have to commit. You have to commit fully, and that is really, really difficult, especially if you risk cannibalization of your existing products, for example, especially if you're going into areas where it's uncertain again, and you don't see the results early on, etc., etc. And then the last one here is the persistence you need to have. When you start working on a new track, a new product line, or a new innovation within your organization, it has to be fully supported by the management team. You have to have one sort of advocate in the management team that are assisting, helping, nurturing this project or this track. But you also need to have patience. You cannot start by comparing it to your existing business lines. There will be deadlines missed, budgets missed. You will need more money. It will take longer time, etc. You will not reach the milestones that you intended from the beginning. So you really, really need to be persistent. And that's always the great challenge here is, how persistent should I be, and when should I kill a project? And that is, I mean, that's where you have the hits or misses. You should be persistent, but not stupid. I mean, I've been persistent in a few of my investments and companies that I've been co-founding or investing in, where I realized looking back that, okay, we should have killed this idea a long time ago. And then I have projects I've been involved with where we actually thinking of killing it several times. Could actually be a situation where we've tried to kill it, but it didn't work. And then eventually a year or 2 or 5 years later, it starts booming and it turns into something really, really interesting. So that is really a challenge. So, but don't wait and see, venture into the unknown, commit, and be persistent. That's the sort of the keys for me here.
I mean, we've seen over the weeks people love a framework, and I think that 4-point framework of, you know, delayed participation, sticking with the familiar, commitment, and persistence is a good way to look at you know, those typical challenges that businesses have around that. I would like to come on to it in a moment around how businesses should approach those strategic decisions. But before we do, just reflecting on a couple of questions coming through in the chat from Rupert. Nicklas, how do you think that tech will influence human behavior and expectations, both at work and elsewhere?
To start with, it will influence us a lot. Sometimes it's take a bit of time, but many technologies, or all technologies that gain some kind of impact, they go through 3 phases. And we can take the example of the car, for example. A bit more than 100 years ago, we started seeing cars on the streets, and they were novelties used by people who were very curious about new stuff and had money to buy a car, for example. So that was the first part of this, is an experimentation phase. You don't really know what to use the technology for. You just get it and then you try it out. The second stage of this is an expansion phase. More people get cars. You start taking in Europe or the US in the 1920s, 1930s, maybe. You start to go to meetings in other towns. You're visiting relatives that live a bit further away. That was possible with a horse and carriage. You start using cars for transportation or small lorries. And then you see technology expanding into society. And the third part of this is the transformation phase, like after the Second World War, when you really start to see how cars get into society in a number of different ways, with drive-in cinemas, drive-in restaurants, suburbs, shopping malls. I mean, and we start building society around this new innovation. We see the same thing with IT. It started with mainframe computers. We had the PCs coming in the 90s. We got the internet, World Wide Web, and now we have smartphones, and we have the phones with us all the time. And that's really when we come to this transformational phase where we start building our lives and society around this innovation. So Rupert, yes, I mean, we definitely see that we are changing the way we live, the way we behave around technologies. We see it in IT now. I can definitely see that we will, in areas such as mobility, electromobility, micromobility, different ways of moving, getting from A to B. That's one way we will see a change in our behavior. We see it in biotechnology on an individual level, where we will relate to ourselves, our bodies, our health in a totally different way. We can see it in energy, distributed energy, batteries, whatever it is that will give us new opportunities.
Understood. Nicklas, thank you for that. And that's a very comprehensive answer to that. Roland, I know you wanted to come in on that as well, or maybe the previous question.
Maybe a bit of both, Paul. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I think the other thing from an enterprise perspective, practically, is you should expect friction. So when users get used to a very positive digital experience outside of your business, and then they come to the office and see things not working the way they expect by comparison, there will be a level of frustration there. Now, thankfully, we see users getting much more empowered today to take action themselves, which brings some of its own challenges. So just going back to the previous question, Paul, I think Nicklas outlined some really great, I mean, very sensible advice there. I think just bringing it down a level to the enterprises that we work with, I think for me, it's important to highlight that only maybe 3 to 4 years ago, I'd love to hear you guys' feedback in the chat if this is true, but in our own portfolio, I know I saw this shift from CIOs, very cost-conscious CIOs, being replaced with chief information and digital officers. And with that, you get this abrupt shift, very abrupt shift, or an attempt at a very abrupt shift from cost cutting, like extreme cost cutting, into big digital transformation. And on one hand, they have to survive. But on the other, and they know this, but it's difficult, they're really lacking the DNA that they need to do the things that Nicklas just referred to. So for me, I think my advice is you really do need to invest in what we call enterprise architecture, maybe practically just the convergence of your technology and business strategy and ways of working. So things like agile and design thinking as internal capabilities. And then importantly, you need to collaborate out with others, very much in the spirit of this forum, but in the broader ecosystem. It's a very rich one, but it's too complicated to have it done to you. And you'll lose if you do that. Two other things, I think, for me, over and under governance. So I think people know governance is going to be important, but in this case, what's really interesting is there is a level of over governance that I'm seeing now. And these are really smart people that lead transformation, but so just to maybe add some context, the center of your business is going to be very much focused on transforming your customer-centric processes. But a lot's happening at the edges of your business, right? And they need to be enabled as well in a safe and scalable way. So some transformation leaders I'm speaking to now, they worry about it. They love the democratization of technology and data, but they're really hesitant to unleash the business on it because they're worried, rightfully, that it's going to allow people to hold on to the legacy because it allows you to connect into legacy systems. So that's an important challenge for people to get through. And I think scaling from the center when you don't know the demand that exists at the edges is a hard strategy, right? So a better one that I've seen working is expecting your partners at the edges, so in finance, IT, et cetera, to be your partner at the edges and be able to push those ways of working as well as your digital agenda from the center. And then finally, when you get that right, after some time, you've got security and ethics to deal with. And I know just from my own experience, once you get past the curve that Nicklas is referring to, when you want to move and change things, and to see that you actually can do that, because as Nicklas mentioned, the technology is getting more accessible. It's easy to forget, and I've been guilty of it myself just in some internal tests, that you need to do this stuff securely and ethically, right? It's something that if you were doing it at the center and you did this all the time, if you were part of an R&D function, you would always think like that. But if you're doing it at the edges and you're now empowered to do stuff, it's very easy to forget. So I think that's the other important part. It's an extension of governance, but it's just worth flagging separately.
So thank you for that. Let me sorry, go over, Nicklas. Come back in on that.
Of course I may. No, sorry. No, but I mean, just touching on the ethical perspective, I mean, that goes for a company and organization, and I mean, what should we provide, how we should provide it and that. But I think also it's on an individual level, it's each and every one's of our responsibility to actually not necessarily fully understand genetics or CRISPR technology, but at least have a basic understanding on what's possible with a lot of these emerging technologies right now. Because there's so much things that is happening in science right now. There's so many things that we'll be able to do in the not so distant future that will fundamentally change the way we live, the way we work, the way we relate to our lives or our spouses or whatever it is. Meaning that I feel that we as individuals have an obligation to actually be on top of this and sort of understand it so that we can be part of the discussion. Because if we don't take charge of that discussion, it will be taken over by it can be scientists, politicians, dictators, or business leaders that have their agenda. Most of them have a perfectly fine agenda, but it's their agenda, not our agenda. So we really, really need to make sure to be part of that discussion, to use technology in the right way.
So let me pose this question to you both, because there's been a number of points coming through on the chat that, let's say, pick up more on the people element from, I think, Mike, from Hazel, from Gillian. Do we need more digital savvy business leaders and more technical specialists in order to drive this forward and be our leaders of tomorrow? Or rather, are we replacing the human element with technology, and do we need to rebalance that?
To start with, I think, and venturing out of the digital only, I think there's so many things happening in technology, and digital is the first thing that comes to mind because it's now very mature. But we really, really need to have business leaders, at least to a certain level, understanding what's happening in innovation and technology, because these things are fundamentally changing value chains. It's fundamentally changing business models in different ways, meaning that if you're a business leader, you really, really need to be on top of this to understand the effects and the consequences of it. So that's really, really important.
Yeah. Paul, I think there's also a shift. We used to say, going 5 years back, that technologists needed to be more business savvy. I think that switch certainly has happened, where business leaders need to be more technically savvy. And I think, yeah, I'd echo Nicklas's point that it needs to be done responsibly. But I do also see there's an old pattern that exists where, I used to work with mining companies a fair bit, and when they worked in a lot of other countries, they had anthropologists on their staff.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important pattern that we would do well to repeat in the digital world.
So I hear that message. We're not replacing the human element, but more adding to it, I guess. It's okay. So Nicklas, I'd like to just dig into maybe some of the core of your thinking around this then, because I think, during these times of uncertainty, how should businesses, do you think, approach strategic technology decisions?
Well, I mean, that's something that I've been struggling with and working with for more than 20 years, trying to take an innovation and make some kind of business sense out of it, right? And for me, it's, I mean, that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, Navigating the Tech Storm, where it was really a book I wanted to read myself, which is probably the main reason you should write a book. But in that I tried to sort of get to the essence of how to approach innovation, and so for me it's a three-way process. First, you need to analyze technologies. You need to get a sense of what's out there. You need to take it all in. You need to be curious, listen into a webinar, read a book, go to the movies. Science fiction is a great way of understanding technology. Read an article, watch the news, and connect the dots, because you will hear something about cyber there, cyber here, and then you realize, okay, there is something going on here. You don't need to go in depth. You don't need to be sort of the expert on in these areas. You just need to connect the dots and understand that something is happening. And when you find that one thing, whether it's AI or data mining, or whether it's Internet of Things, and some of these things are quite close to us now, you also need to understand the timing perspective. Internet of Things, cloud computing, 5G, these things are happening now. Quantum computing, teleportation, or cloning of humans is not really happening now, meaning that from a business perspective, you probably don't really need to put that much energy into that right now. So you identify the technologies that could be relevant, you understand that they are happening sort of now, so you need to prepare for it. Roland, yeah?
Oh, no, forgive me. I want to add something to the end.
Sorry. Yeah, and then the second part of this, after you've analyzed, you need to assess the implications for your organization, for your business. And I mean, for a corporation, it's a competitive perspective. What's happening in the value chain, the power structure in the value chain, is that changing? You need to look at it from a customer perspective. And also very interesting, this where you actually have people getting used to digital tools, for example, in their private lives, and want to see the same possibilities at their work. So I mean, that's one way of customers pushing you as a company to implement new things, to develop new systems, etc. So the competition, the customer, and also your company perspectives, where there's a lot of ways to streamline, to be more productive, to decrease cost, improve efficiency, etc., by using technologies. So that's the assess part. And after you've analyzed what's out there, you've assessed the implications, you need to adapt. You need to look at your business models. You need to look at your strategies. You need to look at how you relate to uncertainty, sustainability, the ethical perspectives of new technologies. So all these things you need to look at to adapt to this new reality that you've sort of identified.
So analyze, assess, adapt. I think, as I said, I know that's at the heart of your framework, and you summarise there probably a lot of pages of thought into a few minutes. Roland, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because I've been through the framework now, and I just find it really fascinating and really just inherently consumable and accessible. So amazing work there, Nicklas. But when you just mentioned joining the dots there, it just made me think of I was like, what is it that's missing from this? And you don't prescribe that people should go and join dots, but it's such a powerful concept when you look at your forecast, for example, because you see that, and you talk about soft signals. So when I look at your forecast and I see, for example, that AR and 5G are down at the moment, right, in your context, I think inherently, if we look at those two things and we think, okay, well, if we know the limitations of AR are partly around the form factor of glasses, for example, and we know that 5G if we know 5G is doing really well in an area, and even IoT is as well, you can start to see the limitations of the form factor of AR being met by your mobile device or even IoT billboards. And that, again, it just came to my mind when you were talking about that soft signals can be found really, really well once you start to look at the relationships amongst the technologies that you highlighted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, when we just AR, augmented reality, and also virtual reality, exactly. I mean, that's just one area where there's been a lot of money being deployed. There's a lot of investments, a lot of companies being funded and sold and acquired. And it's quite natural that you get sort of a setback. You have all these promises and all these expectations, and rarely a technology lives up to those expectations in the short term. Meaning that if AR is down, in my sort of top 10 list right now, it will probably bounce up quite soon. It could even be in a couple of weeks when potentially Apple will launch their AR device. We don't know, but I mean, things will bounce back up again. But that is just a way of trying to understand these weak signals, and it's really hard to see those signals. The signal to noise ratio with many of these emerging technologies is really, really low.
So So it's interesting. Listen to you speak. You know, you're obviously very conversant and using a lot of terms. A lot of people here may not be thoroughly familiar with, and I think it touches on a point that Anne's made in the chat as well. Is that a lot of this comes down to education as well. So do you think businesses, Nicklas, will expect their employees to come with a lot more savviness around everything you're talking about, be it AR, AI, Internet of Things? Is it time for businesses to now get more involved in the educational curriculum and say, look, the business leader of tomorrow needs to come armed with certain things in the technology space?
I think what we're seeing now, and as I mentioned before, is the multidisciplinarity, the cross-pollination of ideas. And I got a question from an engineer. It was a software engineer, late 20s. He was thinking of going back to school, getting a master's in software engineering or something. And he asked me for advice. What do you think I should do? And I said, well, do something different. Because you of course you could go deeper into software engineering, but you could also study philosophy, business, whatever it is that will broaden your perspective. And I think that is really, really important. On a personal level, I think that's really important. On a corporate level, I think having different mindsets, different perspectives, of course, if you're a large corporation today, you need to have an understanding of automation, AI, robotics, cloud computing, whatever it is. But it's not that you can expect of all your employees to have a deep understanding of these areas. A shallow layperson understanding, I think that's highly relevant to see the opportunities and challenges. But then, of course, in any field, you need the experts to come in and sort of make sense of it. So in education, yes, I see companies being engaged in education. There's a lot of push in STEM, science, technology, etc., engineering. I think that's relevant. But sometimes, even though I live with technology 24/7, for me, going to an art gallery, going to the movies, read a book on something that's completely different, I think that's also very, very useful.
So now you're all warmed up, we can hit you with the difficult questions.
I think Anne's question was
a couple of questions coming through right at the very start, and also from Anne, and also just now on Rupert. To what extent do you think technology will and maybe should be directed towards climate, biodiversity, human relationship with nature? Arguably, many people see that the constant technology advance takes us further away from that, almost missing the point. And it's something that we've discussed a lot within this forum, Nicklas. And so just, your views just around, I guess, technology solving those bigger issues as well that are not just important to us, but to future generations as well. Should we not just be pivoting technology towards that rather than the new iPhone or whatever else we need?
Short answer to that, absolutely. Next question. No, sorry. No, definitely. And I just recently, I think just the other day, I had a discussion with people. You get all these smart young people coming out, getting their first jobs. You have a software engineering degree, you've done some work in machine learning, and you're interested in AI, and you start working for a media company optimizing advertising performance. And that's just a waste of talent in my view. People are free to make their own choices, of course, but we see a lot of talent being used to make more money. And that's, for me, that's not 100% relevant. What I do right now, spend a lot of time with, is the European Innovation Council and the European Innovation Council Fund, which is a 4 billion euro venture capital fund. And we actually see these things happening. And I've spent 20 years working in frontier tech, in scientific-based innovations and trying to commercialize that. And I've seen a great shift maybe in the past 3-4 years, where a lot of more interest from entrepreneurs, a lot of more interest from investors, from politicians, from large corporations, from financial institutions to actually deploy money and talent to solve many of these challenges that we are facing. There's a great number of interesting companies in the energy field, in wind power, photovoltaics, fusion. I mean, there's all this innovation happening. So I really do think that we are growing up as a species. We are seeing that maybe it's not relevant to get another social network in place or another betting platform, that we actually have a lot of smart people today that are putting their minds and their talents into solving many of these issues. A lot of companies, a lot of investors working and having a perspective on sustainability and social impact investing, where you actually make a difference, but you make money at the same time. So I've definitely seen that shift in the last couple of years. So I'm not really that worried. I understand if people, I mean, from an everyday perspective, just see the next iPhone or add-ons to their social networks or something, but behind the scenes, I really do see a great change. So I'm quite optimistic there, actually.
It's coming. All right, Roland?
I was just going to add, I think it's, I agree with that. I think the talent is there, but I would guess that a lot of that talent has come from places like online gambling, gaming, and even things like pornography, use cases that we don't think would be necessarily to society's benefit, but that's where they cut their teeth. And I think if we think of other examples like wearables, I know there's a mixed feeling even in our business about all the Strava updates that people get from their watches. But now we see people, really talented people, using those wearables to crowdsource data that can help predict outbreaks or pandemics. So it is a curve, and I agree with Nicklas overall that we probably are getting past that to the point where we can start applying to really serious, beneficial things. But we should be mindful that a lot of that, behind that curve comes a lot of stuff that we just didn't care about.
Yeah.
But there were killer use cases at the time.
Absolutely.
So Nicklas, looking forward then, so you've got a variety of business leaders on this forum. What's going to be the next big thing in technology that everyone here should be ready for?
Assuming that they are already well prepared and working with, for example, cloud computing, data analytics, Internet of Things, the understanding that with 5G and better fiber connections, we will have a lot of opportunities, business opportunities in our own businesses when the communication speeds are increasing. Assuming that that is happening, I think, I mean, what Roland mentioned, augmented reality, of course, there's going to be a lot of new ways how we interact with each other and how we interact with information. I definitely see a situation in the future where we don't stare at our screens like we do today, like we do right now, that we wear the screens more or less, whether it's a headset or it's a pair of glasses, it's a contact lens or even an implant in the future. So augmented reality, virtual reality, different ways of interacting with information, that's definitely happening. I think also that in automation, AI, robotics, I see many examples of, not in a general sense, that you have general intelligence being created artificially or general robotics, androids, but in specific use cases, when you automate a task or automate a line of business or an industry, changes happening overnight, and that is also something you need to be very aware of, I think. In energy, what will happen if we have distributed energy systems? If energy becomes cheaper in the future, how will that affect my business? Another way, of course, is mobility. Since we are seeing a lot more novel ways of moving around, whether it's an electrical scooter, a rental bike, an autonomous car, but also supersonic intercontinental jet flight or electrical flight, for example, flying cars. I mean, all these things are happening right now. Not all of them will break through and become mainstream, but how will that affect us? How will that affect us when we go to the office, if we go to the office, when we travel for business, when we travel for pleasure? I mean, so these things are happening. So energy, mobility, communication and higher speed of bandwidth, etc., automation, and then also, of course, AR, VR interaction, and how we see and digest information in different ways.
So if that's the, so not much there then, just a few things coming over there. But if that's what's coming, what do you then see as the biggest change those technologies will have on businesses today? What's it going to change? How's it going to impact them?
I mean, yeah, take AR, for example. We're not going to see screens around us in the way we see today. We're not going to see people staring into their smartphones. We're going to see people with a blurry gaze just looking distant into the future when they have contact lenses on instead. We're going to see in automation, we're going to see jobs disappear, new jobs being created. We're going to see that is changing because if we don't, in my company, if I don't automate what can be automated, then someone else in some of my competitors will do it, and then I will be out of business. So I mean that's a drive, and that's been sort of on the drawing board and in test beds for a while. But I see that being deployed right now. And again, mobility. If we have micro mobility, if we have autonomous driving more or less coming into the future, that will change where we live, how we live. That will change how we get to the office, where the office will be. And I mean, combine that to what we have right now with a fully remote workplace. We will, of course, bounce back and be in the office, but we'll definitely do it in a different way, of course. So that's something that companies need to adjust to and understand. I mean, if you have a company today that are seeing their business based on how people move around, of course, you need to be very careful and understand how are people going to move around in the future. So it's if you have a roadside restaurant near a gas station, of course, the amount of people that will pass through that gas station will be different in the future.
Yeah,
definitely.
So no, thank you for that. And I know it's always difficult just to look into that crystal ball, but there's definitely, and a few of the comments in the chat as well are kind of pointed towards this. There is an element of, I think you just alluded to it, the democratization of technology and data. There's still, I think, in terms of one of the comments in the chat, is there still a place for the garden shed inventor? I think you've pointed a little bit towards that. But as technology and data become more accessible to businesses and to people, and that line between social media and business media begins to blur, do you begin to have any concerns around how the art of the possible may result in ethical boundaries being crossed?
Could you say that again?
So do you begin to see ethical concerns over kind of where we're going? So as we have more and more data sets, we have more and more technology, more data sets, and the social media and business media lenses and social media lenses begin to blur. Do you have concern over the direction of travel in terms of where we're going from an ethical perspective? Are we in danger of crossing over any ethical lines in how we're beginning to use technology?
Absolutely. I think we've already crossed that line from time to time. I think that companies like Facebook, for example, are definitely pushing the boundaries, at least. I mean, we can discuss if they cross the line or not. But I've opted out of being tracked. I do that if I can. If I get asked, I opt out of being tracked as much as possible. And that's a power struggle. I mean, we see that on the one hand, companies like Facebook, etc., companies like Google or even Amazon, who make a lot of money on the more they know about you as an individual, the more money they make selling targeted ads to you. And for myself, that is really a challenge. Oh my God, I just need to make sure that I have power here. Sorry.
That's all right. Roland, I know that's something you look at as well. Where do you see in terms of the world that you look at in terms of, are we crossing over that ethical line?
So I sort of alluded to it before, that it's a really important one for us to be aware of at the edges of the business, because I think for large organizations that are doing this in a big way like Facebook, they will have to do that, right? And we can expect when they have departures that it was an intentional one. But as we democratize further and have these garden shed inventors unleash them on more powerful technology, I think it is critical that we have them thinking about that as well, and that we make the partners that you guys work with at the edges of your business also incorporate that alongside any of your design principles, naming conventions, etc., is the ethical side of it. But I think there's a danger of going too far and not unleashing those garden shed developers, because we see the time between the state of the art. So when Microsoft released Azure Cognitive Services, it's only a few years since basic things like form analyzers were available. And that's now something that savvy Excel developers can use with a few clicks. And it can train an AI module for that. So we don't want to not use that, but we need to include these ethical principles with your normal design ones.
Sorry, that is also, I mean, all these things are, I mean, as Roland says, we don't want people not to use these things. We just want them to use it in an ethical, thoughtful way. I mean, we can take all technologies. I can list 100 technologies, and you can give me good reasons for not using any of them, and I can give you good reasons for using them. What I think is we need to have that discussion. We need to, as I said earlier, people need to be somewhat informed and at least a bit into this, so that we can have a discussion, a public discussion about how we should use these things, because technology in itself is useless unless we make sure to use it in the right way. And I mean, when it comes to democratization, I can see a number of challenging things. I mean, things that are happening right now that is very challenging. In Sweden, for example, rural Sweden, where you don't have the best connections, there is definitely a digital divide. It's a great difference of living in Stockholm, having high bandwidth fiber connection in your office or in your home. You're versatile, you understand these things. I mean, for me, I work with technology. I can reap all the benefits from this. And then you have people with that don't have the infrastructure, maybe don't have the money to buy a smartphone, maybe don't have the experience or the education to actually take all these things in. And of course, that digital divide or that technological divide is really challenging in the long term, because we're going to see a lot of frustration coming out of this.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Nicklas, we've got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to give you a bit of a quick fire questions based on some of the chat I've seen. Crypto is crypto an opportunity or a threat to our future business success?
Opportunity. If you say crypto more as the system than the individual currencies.
Okay, very good. And maybe just bring you in on this as well, Roland. I think it's a question that John's, I think in particular, mentioned, and others have a couple of times. But at a time when, let's say, we are craving more human interaction, do you see that there is a danger that we're focusing too much on technology, creating things we don't need, 3D TVs or something in the chat, and overlook the more human side? Are we going too far?
I'd say that we definitely have a danger of it. And I think it was only yesterday somebody had made a big distinction to me between UX, user experience, and UI, the user interface, which implies technology. So I think if we focus on the form or the user experience, then we can help avoid going too far away from the human experience.
Nicklas, do you agree with that?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Sometimes it's difficult to know which paths are dead ends and useless in the end. So, I mean, we can also appreciate people trying out new things and failing. I think that's one part of progress, actually. So,
yeah. Okay. All right. I'm gonna ask you one more thing, Nicklas. Then, what is it you would like everyone here to take away from today's forum in terms of navigating what you see as the tech storm coming up? What's the key point business leaders? You've mentioned a few frameworks. What's the key thing they should take away?
I think, I mean, we can only see what we are prepared to see, as I think it was Immanuel Kant said that once. So be curious. I think curiosity is a great way of approaching this. Be curious, take things in. Don't expect that you can take everything in because there's so much information out there. But while you're curious, also be a bit skeptical. Because don't buy into what everyone else is saying. Form your own opinions about these things. And I mean, all of you here today, you probably have a day job, unlike me. So you can't spend hours every day thinking about these things. And I know that's a challenge, but at least have your tentacles out, be curious, take things in, and in the back of your head, think about how they will affect you and how you eventually need to adapt to that change, basically.
Nicklas, Ronan, thank you ever so much. I hope you enjoyed it, everyone. You've heard a huge amount there in terms of navigating it, the frameworks Nicklas has mentioned, from the very start around delayed participation, sticking with the familiar, the commitment and the persistence in terms of not sleepwalking back to the past, and his framework of analysing, assessing, adapting. But look, we've run out of time. If you've liked what you've heard and you want to engage with Nicklas more, please let us know and we can connect you. Look, a big thank you once again to Nicklas and Ronan and all of you. There's been some great discussion in the chat, so thank you very, very much for that. I'm sorry if I didn't get to your question, but hopefully you can put into action some of what you've heard today in terms of how you use technology to shape your business going forward. There'll be a video of our forum posted on our website if you do want to look back and understand some of the things that have been said in a little more detail. So please look out for that and share with your colleagues, friends and LinkedIn contacts. And next week we'll be speaking with John Ashcroft, looking at the future of the economy, where we're going, what the challenges are now we're coming out of the pandemic. So until then, and on behalf of all my Protiviti and Robert Half team here, I'd just like to extend my best wishes to you all. Stay safe, be bold, be kind to each other, and we look forward to seeing you all next week. Thanks very much, everyone.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thanks,
I'll
Nicklas.
share
Thanks,
some
everyone.
material with Paul that he can share with everyone.
Super. Thanks so much, Nicklas. We'll put that in the chat.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye-bye.